Hey everybody, this is Perch. There's this video that I saw and shared of this guy losing his mind in the Miami airport, and it's the challenge with the video, or the thing that struck me, is the video gets shared. The guy's not wearing a mask. The other people are wearing masks. The guy seems to be angry about having to wear a mask, although it's hard to tell. He's not wearing a mask, but he's rampaging around. And when I say, rampaging around, I don't mean just, yelling obscenities. He's shouting out racial terms. He's picking up the little metal, poles that have, cloth tape to make cues and lines, and he's like throwing them around, and he's like jumping at people. The dude throws one punch and then promptly falls on his ass. He misses with that punch, but he guy's a lunatic. And because it is COVID time and everyone is talking about masks and everything has to be seen through that lens, the responses are, oh, look at this idiot without a mask. Look at this. This is what maskless people are like. And then the other side's like, this is what happens if you push them too hard and you put the rules on. And I think all that's irrelevant, because you could have taken the same video, you could have posted it from 2018 or 2015, and the guy is still a lunatic. Like, there's no looking at that and going, well, we can frame it up with either being pushed too hard or being, a Trumper, and so therefore he's acting that way. I mean, you could add whatever you want onto it. But, if you're in an airport, I think everybody would agree, and you start stomping around and throwing stuff and threatening to punch people and shouting at people, then you're nuts. You're gonna go to jail. There's a brief in this thing, by the way, of yet another angle to the story, where it's like it's a white guy that's rampaging around, and then people are like, if this was a black guy, he'd be shot. So it's just, we've got to, pile all these other things on, and we're overcomplicating something simple. In that case, it was very simple. Picture tells a thousand words. Guy's nuts. And yet we want to frame it up with, everything we can to play to our agendas. Now, what does any of this have to do with comics? I've already lost some people. Like, I don't want to hear about COVID. That's fair enough. But one of the issues I've talked about on this show before is villains. Is that the villains in comics have been watered down and weakened significantly. And when I say weakened, I don't mean like literally weakened, although sometimes that's also the case. The villain gets stopped with one punch. But it relates to this whole behavior of wanting to give people reasons, wanting to make a bigger statement than just villainy. When you've got Doctor Doom, when you have Darkseid, when you have whoever it happens to be, the Joker, and DC, in DC's defense, I think they have done a lot less than Marvel. DC has not gone as far down the deep end as Marvel has with their villains. But they are in some cases. I mean, they're trying in some cases, and it's this idea of, let's make the villain sympathetic. Number one, let's make the villain understandable. Let's give the villain deeper reasons behind the villain is crazy and the villain is just wanting to cause chaos. We went through the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, some of the aughts, not needing to worry about this. I think there's, people like to point to a patient zero. I think one of the patient zeros is Joss Whedon, because he invented kind of two things. Let's get deeper into the sympathy of the villain to make them more complex characters. And in many cases, it made them less complex by doing that. The other thing Whedon did is he liked the sight gag of villainy, where the hero is flustered and there's the drama's going on with the hero. He's involved in some kind of argument with his girlfriend or whatever it happens to be, and this villain comes stomping in like, I'm going to take control, and then the hero just shoots him. Firefly would do this from time to time. I liked Firefly, but it was it had this bit of wanting to make a gag out of, like, kicking the villain's ass with one punch, or easily outwitting the villain. The villain comes in like, I woke up today and I chose evil, Wahahaha. And then the villain gets like, the hero's like not even paying attention. It's like, I'm getting my coffee, like hits him in the face, and the villain goes down. And then that's the joke. And The problem is villainy. For one thing, not all villainy needs to be explained. If you've got, Skeletor, cartoon character, and he's rampaging around because he wants power and he wants to, I don't know, turn Eternia into this purple landscape with snakes everywhere. I have no idea what was his plan. He wanted control, but anyway, he wanted to do bad things, and he was willing to pal around with Stinkor and a bunch of losers to get there. Anyway, you don't need to get into the motivations behind why he's that way. The recent cartoons seem to want to indicate that no woman would have him as a man, and so that's why he put on a giant purple cape and was evil. And that's do we need to know that Skeletor didn't get laid when he was young? Does that help any? Does any of that add to the mythology of the character? With Marvel, you look down the line of villains, and what you've seen is this very strange behavior of wanting to make every villain have a tragic backstory and maybe a couple other things, and then also tied to contemporary stuff. This villain had, some white privilege when they were waking up as growing up as a kid, and this other villain, was beaten by a more abusive father, and so that turned him into a homicidal maniac. And there's aspects of that backstory that do not help. And in many cases, you have complex backstories. Doctor Doom is a character that's been weirdly transformed over the last 10 to 12 years with additions to his character and his personality that completely unnecessary. Nobody needed those. None of that helped at all. Over in the X-Men, they've taken, for all intents and purposes, all the villains and made them kind of surly heroes, or I don't know, the mutants are all together, kind of destroyed the hero-villain complex, and they do kind of evil things. But Sinister's off, like, super concerned about his cape, and and then the new villains become just very random, generic humans who are like, we don't like mutants for some reason. We do evil. And we do that because, when we were a kid, mutants teased us about our lunchbox. That all this suffers. And it goes away from the simple thing. It's one of the reasons why that video of the guy in Miami was it was a nice, clean video, in the sense that guy shows up, starts screaming, stomping around, throwing stuff. There you go. He's crazy. He's the bad guy in this scenario. If anybody's in the airport, they just want to get their bags and get the F off and get out of this miserable hellhole that is the airport. They don't want to have to deal with some crazy person who's angry for whatever reason. Does the reason matter? Is the point. I mean, I guess you can, for a psychologist standpoint, it could be interesting. Oh, why is this guy such a lunatic? I don't know. People love to hear the backstories of things after the fact. That's fine, but it doesn't matter. Guy's crazy. Guy's an inconvenience. Guy's a problem. In comics, the villains can plot. They can be bad. They can do evil things. They can come up with complex plots to kind of attack the hero and do things. We don't need to know that they also don't recycle. It's not important. I mean, if the Red Skull is planning to, spray this red mist all over New York and turn everybody into skeleton people, or whatever his plan is this month, then you don't need to go into how, when he was a teenager, women rejected him and it made him angry and radicalized him. That's not necessary additional detail for the Red Skull. And if anything, this backstory material hurts the situation, hurts the character. I'm not saying everybody should be two-dimensional, and I'm sure nobody in their right mind would take that from what I'm saying. You don't need to make everybody just, cartoon mustache twirling villains. But you also need to be careful as a writer not to keep piling things up to try and add complexity or detail or understanding or empathy to your characters that, their plot point in this comic book is to, murder millions of people. That's actually pretty complex enough as a point. You do not also need to get into random backstory things. It's not relevant. Now, why do people do this? Well, I mean, in many cases, they're trying to make sense of the world around them. In many cases, they believe they're being additive rather than, they don't realize they're being actually subtractive to the character. They think they're being additive by adding nuance and complexity. Like, people always wondered what would make the Green Goblin mad. Well, turns out he didn't get laid, and then he didn't know how to handle women, and so he became a crazy misogynist, and that's why he throws pumpkin bombs around. I mean, that that you know, it it's tiring. It doesn't help, and it's not necessary. The spectacle of a guy in a giant Green Goblin suit, soaring around the town and throwing bombs at people is enough. You're good. You don't need to go any further than that. And the idea that we can rip things from the headlines by connecting to current issues or problems or things people are struggling with, like I've said before, doesn't necessarily help. It you've got this fantastical world. It's weird to me. Your creativity is free to come up with anything you want. These characters can have any backstory. I mean, Galactus was an explorer trying to save his universe, passed from the previous universe to the new one. What they did not also insert in there that Galactus had an eating disorder, and when he was teased because he was fat as a kid, and so that's why when he became a super god, he's tortured by this need to incessantly consume. Like, nobody needs that. Nobody that was not necessary. Does not help the character at all. And lots of people became attracted, excited, and loved comics without any of this stuff. And maybe that's the best point to end on. Is a lot of people talk about, well, comics used to sell more back in the day, and they did. And there was the newsstand, and there were all these reasons why comics sold well. It wasn't just that, the quality of comics was miraculously better. They were in more places. All that's true. They were marketed, they were distributed, they were, you could find them, they were cheaper. All that stuff all counts into why they sold better. But the part of that I think is interesting to consider is comics in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s brought in millions of people who were excited to read these stories. They got hooked. They stuck around, and they made this a lifetime thing, or at least decades. They kept reading comics. Now, comics in that era sometimes get the complaint of being overly simplistic. They didn't really have any depth to them. Those stories are very shallow. I was seeing some current writers like, I respect the comics that came before, but they're so shallow. Like, I don't see how anyone could get into it. Yeah, but millions did. More got into it then than now. So maybe there's a little bit something to this quote unquote shallow storytelling, because that seemed to be working better for everyone. That sort of things are at. Something to think about. I find this need to add in complexity into very simple situations useless. It's not making the comics better. It's not attracting people. It's not getting more people excited. It's reductive. In many cases, it's taking some of the mystery away from some of these characters. Ultron, evil, crazy villain. Do not need to know how he feels about AI rights. Just, we can assume he wants to kill all the humans. He's pretty maniacal about AI rights. We don't need it spelled out. Anyway, let me know your thoughts. Villains is one of those things that the more I think about it, the more I believe this is one of the absolute key things about comics that changed, that has hurt us. That we just struggle to have real villainy in comics. In the big two, I'll say this is one reason I do like Mark Millar, because when he brings villains to the table, they are crazy, evil, bloodthirsty, nasty villains. He brings threats, and when the heroes defeat those threats, it's worth reading. It's exciting. That's That's one big reason that I like what he does, because he brings the threat. It's how it should be. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below. As always, thanks for listening.